And we're ready to plunge into another session. Still talking about impact venture, but this time taking a deep dive in how to do it in public healthcare. And also more to the point, Sarah, how to do it properly in healthcare. So this will be hopefully kind of quite an interesting and practical session. So thank you very much, Sarah Hubar-Fisher, Senior Director of Global External Innovation at Johnson & Johnson. Have I got that right?
Yes, but actually I just realized I didn't update it. So no, now I head up strategic finance for public health, but
yes, okay, detail. Right, strategic finance for public health. So, but good point, because this is a relatively new role for you. So maybe start us off with, talk us through what does that involve? What's your focus and how does that fit into the general strategy?
Sure, so I mean, I think even before pre-pandemic, there was still a focus or a sort of a tagline going around in the public health sector that there's a desire to figure out how to crowd in more private capital to public health initiatives. Now, clearly, since the global pandemic, that's become even more of a highlight. And so it was really about taking that practitioner's perspective and moving from the tagline into practice and trying to say, what is the role of Johnson & Johnson as a private capital player in driving more private capital and looking at new structural finance solutions that can solve for global health problems using the entire suite of capital we have at our disposal. So that was really sort of the genesis of what this role was about, where we've spent a lot of time historically thinking about these things as non-for-profit and foundation-related exercises. Although that is still, I think, core to our agenda, we are now really looking also at impact finance and for-profit ways to engage.
Yeah, okay. And you, when we were talking just before this, you had a really good explanation for this question that I've always had, which is, why should Johnson & Johnson even do this kind of thing? There's a sort of, when we talk about ESG, sometimes I nod off a little bit because everybody sort of just says, oh yes, we should do this because, it's a good thing to do and it makes us look good. But, there are actually even better reasons why a healthcare company should be engaging in this way, right?
Yeah, so what we talked about is really kind of moving from like a 1980s model of philanthropic efforts into redefining what it means to do impact finance and impact work in the space. For us, everything really does start as usual with the science. And so whenever we're working on an agenda, we're working on asset development, we wouldn't have been in a position to develop the COVID vaccine in the timing that we did had we not already been working on small molecule work in that area. So the scientific agenda will always lead, and there's value for us in working on public health problems and the science around public health problems, even if they don't necessarily have massive commercial impact with the core business. So that's one, is that we tend to lead with the science. And then on the finance side, I think from some of the earlier panelists we've had today, you can hear from corporate agenda that, impact-weighted accounts, maybe alongside GAAP accounting, is coming. What we are able to describe to our shareholders as, our impact goals and objectives and how we intend to reach them is becoming, a corporate board exercise. It's not just sort of a foundation-related discussion. So we know this is all coming, and there is an expectation, obviously, that the largest and most broadly based healthcare company in the world would have a role to play in that. And we want to take a leadership role in shaping that rather than being reactive to it. So that's really why we're heavily involved in the space.
Yeah, okay, so the science and then also just being kind of involved in shaping the agenda. I mean, these are both sort of excellent and really practical reasons to do this, not just because, it looks good and it's a tick box exercise that you have to do to, for goodwill or, public image or those things. So that said, if there's a good reason, like a genuinely good reason to do it, then there's a good reason to do it well, and that's kind of what we're going to dive into a little bit. So tell us a little bit about J&J Impact Ventures, which was this fund that was founded in 2019, I think?
That's right.
Which is doing some of this catalytic investing into public healthcare.
Yes, so we have, so Johnson & Johnson Impact Ventures does sit within the J&J Foundation, and it does have access to both catalytic and commercial investment capital, although impact-related with its focus. It started because, whether you believe these market cap numbers or not, but let's just use the ones that have been published for illustration. If you believe that there is about $700 billion in impact investment capital out there, and only 7% of that is currently used with a health focus, then there's clearly a lot of room for improvement. And again, given our role and where we sit in the healthcare sector, it's important that we help drive other players to come to the table and start to influence the amount of capital going into the impact space as it relates to health. So Johnson & Johnson Impact Ventures was born out of that drive and an initiative for us to play a role there. And it's really not focused on therapeutic asset development like our Johnson & Johnson Development Corporation would be, in more medicines development. It's focused on healthcare workers, healthcare systems, capacity building, and driving more healthcare system strengthening type capabilities into low and middle income countries, with a focus on East Africa, Southeast Asia, and for our health equity work, it's focused in the US and North America.
Yeah. And the funding was recently increased, right? You started with 15 million, and then now it's a 50 million fund, which is usually, I take that as a vote of confidence. Yeah. So, is that because things have been going well? I mean, the initial projects have kind of taken off.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an investment, there's a standard IC, just like you'd have for any other corporate venture capital investment, and ours has pretty strong representation at very senior leadership levels in the finance part of Johnson & Johnson. So in that sense, I mean, we've reached about, we've worked and partnered with, let's say, like 50 social entrepreneurs in the first 15 million. There was about a reach of over 13,000 healthcare workers and 2 million people. And we want to continue to amplify that impact. And so at the end of last year in Q4, we got approval for an additional tranche of 50 million to be put to work for Impact Ventures work. So yeah, we're quite confident in the direction that we're heading there.
Yeah. And then talk us through that kind of model that you have, which is, really about turning these things that you invest in into, if not kind of commercial, fully commercial, but models, but at least sort of self-financing, self-sustaining, trying to get away from just that kind of living from grant to grant kind of mentality.
Yeah, so we believe that the long-term success of any impact agenda in the public health sector does require that you have and you focus and you operate like a business. Now, that doesn't mean that catalytic capital and philanthropic capital are not essential to the story. They are, but alone, we don't believe that they will solve a problem. So given the fact that many healthcare challenges do have a long-term investment horizon, particularly when you're talking about the stuff that we're looking at within the impact space, we focus on ensuring that whether it's a blend of catalytic and then impact commercial capital, that there is an agenda that this would be self-sustaining. Without that, I think you find many stops and starts in philanthropic work, and those are things that we're trying to stay away from and don't necessarily want to be associated with. We also see the burden that it places on the implementers on the ground when you have access to something and suddenly you don't because funding dries up. So how do we use both our expertise in the healthcare sector, our networks, and then our financial acumen to create vehicles that would allow for sustained financing for some of the largest public health problems? And that's really what I think excites me and excites our group about what we're about to do and how we can affect change.
So, but then this involves getting really, rolling up your sleeves and getting deep into the work with, again, some of these projects and helping them to become something that is, a commercially viable thing.
Right, and we do that. I mean, we try to bring everything we have to bear to support the social entrepreneurs that we work with. And we do have success stories already. I mean, Jacaranda Health is a maternity health clinic based out of Kenya. It started off as a non-for-profit. It started off as one clinic. And most recently, we participated in their Series A, and it did take a structural adjustment to the way that they were operating in order for them to get to the point where they could break even, and now they're working on expanding to their third hospital. So we do see it's possible. But we do recognize that it absolutely requires the combination of different types of capital and different types of capital tools to get after some of these opportunities.
Right. Okay. But yeah, so quite hands-on work. I mean, do you have a big team to do this, or how do you organize that?
We're quite small at the moment, so we do really leverage our networks, both internally and externally. Luckily, these topics are ones that do attract kind of the right types of people, and we can generally borrow people's time quite effectively at the moment.
So you can get sort of support for the rest of the broader organization and kind of bring them in tactically. And
Yes, and I think because it is a newer space of corporate venture capital, we also have a lot of conversation and visibility at this very senior level of our executive committee, who are also understanding that this is something that they need to learn and want to build towards. So it's a nice reciprocal relationship where we're getting guidance and expertise from them, and they're also diving in and learning about a new space of investment capital that typically was not part of our core effort.
Sure. And what have you learned, that didn't work? I mean, there's always things you learn the hard way, so.
Yeah. Well, in short, I would say going at it alone, what I love about this space is the opportunity for collaboration. So I'm in constant conversation with Philips Healthcare, their impact capital, Merck's impact ventures. We exchange notes about approaches. Some take the approach of they did fund-of-fund first investments and now are starting to make their first direct. We've done the opposite. We made direct investments first, and now are also, we most recently made, at the end of last year, an investment into cross-border impact ventures. So that's one of our first fund-of-fund forays. And we understand the challenges that we have in presenting some of these business cases to our respective corporate investment committees and talking through how to source capital differently inside our environments. And so it's one of those places in corporate collaboration, which is really refreshing, where we're all really helping each other and realize that this isn't something that you want to own on your own. It's not something that, unlike other areas where you're mostly competitive, you may find an interesting opportunity and it's, everything is a closed door conversation and a clean room, and we don't want to let our competition know what we're up to. In this case, when we find an opportunity that's interesting, we're telling everybody else about it, to try to help bring other partners on the ground that have different capabilities, whether it's technology, supply chain, med tech versus therapeutic assets, digital. We need a whole village of people to get after these problems. So yeah, it's a very fun area to work with from a collaboration perspective.
Yeah, so that must be nice because you've got a kind of a set of colleagues almost who are kind of working on the same problems. Have you actually collaborated on a project on the ground yet, or is that going to come later?
Yes, we've made one of our largest catalytic opportunities, which we're not yet ready to publicly announce, but we will do so this year. So it's the largest one that we've made to date. It's coming with 2 other very large parties, and then we're in diligence right now alongside 2 other large healthcare companies on a fund-of-fund opportunity together,
okay.
Which would involve both catalytic and commercial capital.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a bit of a call to action as well. If anybody else is doing a healthcare, impact fund, Sarah, talk to Sarah afterwards. Just kind of, we're almost out of time, but one final question. What's coming next? Where do you go from here?
Well, so my background is more on the med tech side of the business, and I find the whole gap in access to surgery just still astonishing. If you think about the fact that 5 billion people in the world don't have access to surgery, and over, let's call it 310 million procedures per year, only about 6% of those are done in low and middle income countries. I think there's a perception that surgery is complicated and it's expensive, but the real data shows that about 65 to 70% of surgical procedures are actually very low in complexity and low cost. Talking about like fixing bone fractures, or providing obstetric fistula type repair for women in low middle income countries. And these are things that are solvable, and I'm really bullish about an opportunity I recently saw in Uganda, the Kibera Surgical Center, which is basically born out of the chief of surgery at Mount Sinai in New York City, who set it up on his own, really. And what they have done there is nothing short of phenomenal. And these are the kinds of opportunities that we need to identify and support. And it's really about making sure that you're using local Ugandan surgeons, local capacity, training and education, and technology has enabled with telesurgery faster, let's say, communication and ways for developed world surgeons to work with developing country surgeons and build that surgical capacity on the ground in those countries. So moving away from this fly in, fly out, you've done a good deed, but you didn't leave anything behind for people to take care of it for themselves. We really want to build surgical capacity on the ground. So I'm very bullish and really excited about getting after that big problem in that space, as well as having a conversation last night around tying in the E and the S of the ESG together. So, you know, Bloomberg, I think, philanthropic group just gave $250 million to clean energy in developing world. And we see solarization of healthcare facilities in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, continuing to grow. So how do you use a network of those facilities to create a carbon credit market and use those things to help fund local health outcomes? I mean, there's a whole world of opportunity here. It does require strong thinking, strong diligence, and same accounting principles that we can't get away from. But I mean, these are areas that I'm really excited about.
Okay, sounds like a lot to come. So perhaps we'll hear, you know, how those have gone. And yeah, eyes on this space. But thanks very much, Sarah, for sharing.
Thank you for the opportunity.